All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, going to read verses 8, 9, and 10. Ecclesiastes 7, chapter 7, verse 8. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. We'll stop our reading there at the end of verse number 10 of Ecclesiastes chapter 7. As we reflect upon the end of another year, as this is, of course, the last Sunday of December, and December, of course, is the last month of the year for 2015, as we find ourselves here, as we think about what shall we think of this morning, or what shall I say this morning, where else to turn but to a clearly understood book at all times than Ecclesiastes. Our focus will be upon verse 8. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. Some might question whether or not that is true, and indeed it is not always true. As with many things that we will find that Solomon writes, we'll say generally that's an accurate statement, though not 100% of the time, as we deal with Proverbs and certainly some of his interesting statements that we find within the book of Ecclesiastes. But the end is better than the beginning. And some might think that along various lines. Some might think that along the lines of sermons. The end is better than the beginning. And I might agree with that to a point. But even, putting aside humorous thoughts that you might have along those lines, the end is better than the beginning because now we have the thoughts out. We can process them. We can see if we need to adjust something within our lives along those lines. So in that vein, it is true that the end is better than the beginning. It's also true that at times I'm simply glad to make it to the end. And that's probably true of my listeners as well. You might say more often than not. But the point can be seen. The end there is at times better than the beginning, and at all times it is. As we travel for the Christmas holidays, as many people do travel, some of you here today have traveled. Sometimes the travel has been difficult and taxing. But at the end of the trip, it's better than at the beginning. There might be times where you question that, but it's always good to go through the event. We go through, we visit with family, hopefully, if we get there, and we return back home, safely we trust, and then we get back to our own bed that we can sleep in. But the end has been better than the beginning. We go through these hopefully joyous times, and we are able to reflect upon the good times that we had. Imagine a ship that leaves a port for a faraway city. It has to go and get cargo, and it goes, and it's a very long trip. The captain knows the storms that were weathered in the trip. He remembers all of those very accurately. He remembers nearly running aground. He remembers nearly being swamped, maybe several times. He remembers the time that they didn't see the stars or the moon for 3 straight nights. He remembers the time when the sun didn't shine for 3 days. He remembers the horrible storms that they went through. But now, the voyage is over. He returns back with his cargo, and the end is clearly better than the beginning. Not only is he back home safely, and he has accomplished the task that he's been given, but he has weathered storms and probably will be wiser and more strengthened because of those storms. The soldier goes off to war. He comes home. The end is definitely better than the beginning. He is able to return. The point is true in many instances in life, but of course it is not always true. We'll look at one example of those later. Perhaps you may have many more, but as always, the idea should be handled carefully. Exceptions. But we'll examine some points here from this simple text in Ecclesiastes that may help us as we reflect upon the end of another year. First of all, we can note that this verse and this thought can help soothe our regrets. Do you ever have any regrets? Do you have any regrets right now as you reflect upon this past year? And another 108 hours and 30 minutes, roughly, 2015 will be gone. It will become a complete part of history. Perhaps you might be mindful of opportunities that you missed. And no doubt you did. I did. Everyone did. It's just the way it is. You may have missed opportunities. You may have made a mistake or two or 20. We might be mindful of that. And regrets can sting. They can affect us. They can be problematic. But people might question then whether the end is really better than the beginning. But it is. This verse can help take the sting out of regrets. People will, oh, how time flies, how I wish I had that to do over again. If I had that year back, I could do it this way and that way, and things would be so much better. Yet if we seriously think about that, we don't really mean it. We don't really want to go through the whole year again. We don't want to weather all those difficulties that we went through. And Ecclesiastes 7:10 says, don't talk about why were the former days better than these. It's that you are not inquiring wisely concerning this. You're not being wise. It's not wise to want to go back in time. Now, certainly we should be, not joyful about mistakes that we have made or opportunities that we have missed, but we should seek to learn from those and be able to use the opportunities that shall come in the future. It's not wise to want to go back in time. Think of the captain of the ship. Does he want to go back and go through the storms again? Those were so enjoyable, and I would just love to do it again. No, he doesn't want to do that. He's glad that he made it through. He's wiser for how to handle the storm so that when the storm comes again, he will be able to deal with it. Would you like to relive your storms of 2015? Would you like to go through those again, the difficult times? No, we do not want to do that. Maybe you've undergone a physical storm. That's possible. Do we really want to hear the doctor deliver that negative news once again? No, that's a horrible time or a horrible day when that occurs. We do not want to relive that. Perhaps your struggles have been spiritual. Perhaps they're spiritual right now. There are difficulties that are to be handled there. And as we look at that, as we reflect upon that, after we come out of that, we do not say, how I wish I could return to that again. But we are grateful to have come through it. Satan's arrows at us have been shot, and we have been able to withstand them. They cannot be used again, not that exact arrow, something similar to it, maybe identical to it in our eyes, but nonetheless, we should be able to handle it better in the future because we've seen it before. Experience is a great teacher. You can probably see this within people that are younger than you, or maybe the same age as you, or maybe at times older than you, I guess. But experience a great teacher is you tell them what would be the best way to do it, but it just doesn't work until they experience it for themselves. Until they can go through that, then you can read a book about it and you'll say, oh, well, that's interesting. But until you experience it, things are a bit different. We have outlasted many of these problems. Do we want to go back in 2015 and struggle with the temptations that we had? No, we don't want to do that. 2015 is nearly gone. Hopefully, you are wiser because of it. You're certainly more experienced. Hopefully, you're wiser. James says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. The testing of your faith produces patience. God uses the events of 2015, and of course before that as well, to grow our patience. He uses even our failures. Sometimes we think, I failed, it's a failure. What do we think of when we think of failure? We think, well, you think of failure, right? That's bad. That's unacceptable. That is not to be tolerated. No, God uses the events of 2015, even our failures, to grow us, to help us, to assist us in the future. It's not the end of the world if we fail at something. It's the end of the world if you give up. It's okay to fail. The question is, am I going to continue? Am I going to get up? And am I going to persist in what is happening in my life, most particularly in my faith? Am I willing to persist there? Failures help us grow. The end of 2015 in that sense is definitely better than the beginning. We do not have to relive the failures, the struggles that we had. We don't want to go back and live those over again. We are freed from that. Hopefully we are wiser. We are certainly more experienced. It can soothe our regrets. This verse also, secondly, can calm our fears about the future. It can calm our fears. Some look at the beginning and ask, will the end really be any better? Some people are just like that, though. Everything is just bad. It's just bad, or it always could have been better. And that's absolutely true. It always could be better. It could always be worse, too. But be careful. It might. But we've looked at the storms of 2015, and we're kind of concerned about the storms of 2016. I don't know what to do. Will I be able to bear under that? Will I be able to handle that? I mean, it's going to be difficult. And you're probably right. It probably will be difficult at times. Will I be able to bear it? Yes, you will. No matter how bad the beginning is, the end is better if you persist, if you continue. This is particularly true for the Christian in their faith, in their walk, as they go along their line. If they continue, the end will be better. Now, if they do not continue, the end will not be better. Certainly not. And as we think about that within our Christian walk, whether we have many trials at the beginning, which often can happen, or wherever they might come, all of us are growing in our faith, in our Christian walk, in our journey with Christ as we seek to do what He has called us to do, what He desires to work within our lives. If we wake up in the morning and the sun is behind the clouds, we don't assume, I don't think, that the sun will never shine again. We don't say, well, I guess the sun's just gone. You don't do that. You say, well, that would be silly. But as we're thinking about that, within our lives, that we go through difficult times and storms, sometimes we might have that mindset. It's just hopeless. There's no point in going on. Well, it's over. It's never over. Unless you say it is. Unless you quit. Unless you give up. Like this small child that asked the parent when there's an eclipse of the sun, why did the sun go out? Now, that child is young and is inexperienced. It is not understood that this just happens and the sun will come back in probably just a few minutes, really, and it will be all right, and things will come back. It's understandable for a child. An adult knows the sun will shine again. If we're in a dark period in life, the same is true. It would be foolish to say, all is hopeless. It's over. Why did Christ go out? Why is He not responding? Why is He not here? If we're going through a dark time, it's not a time to say, well, the sun just went out. It's just over. We might say, this is a really dark time. This is really difficult, and I'm not enjoying this at all. But God is still God. He is still there. He is still speaking. He is still drawing me. He is obviously seeking to grow me. Now, granted, as we're going through that, those are not words that we want to have, or that we usually do have. We want to have those, but usually people are more along the lines of despair. Hopeless, pointless. I can't go on. You can go on. Reflect, think, from our Sunday school lesson, pray. But we can take this verse as a prophecy that gives us hope and to dispel fears, to give us peace that God is still there. He will assist. He will help. When we are in a dark period, and maybe you're in those right now, Obviously, we don't know what's going on inside of every other person's life, what they're struggling with, what they're thinking about, what's happening. If you're in a dark period, the one thing that we can say, whatever we are experiencing, is do not despair. Do not despair. The end of the matter will be better than the beginning. God is still in charge. He promised Israel. He has promised us. He promises everyone. He knows what he is bringing us to. He knows the plans that he has for us. He knows what's going to happen, and it is good and proper, though the journey at times may be a bit taxing and difficult. God has a plan for you even in a dark time. One great example of that, of course, within the Bible is Joseph. He went through a really dark time. Generally stated that whatever your dark time is, you probably haven't struggled physically with your conditions like he did, as he went to prison for quite a while as he sold into slavery. Anyone sold into slavery this week? You're here, I'm assuming not. You know, he's falsely accused. He's thrown into prison. It's a dark moment. It's a dark moment. He could not have risen to his position in power without going through the dark moment, though. We must stoop. We must go down. We must, at times it appears, be conquered, but we must be refined before we can truly shine. If you're in a dark moment, and maybe you are right now, or maybe you were last week, or maybe you will be next week, or next month, or whenever it happens to come, if you're in a dark moment, dreading what's going on, dreading the future, take heart from this verse. The end of a thing is better than the beginning. And we can see that from a practical point of view as well. When everything is over, when you reach the end, certainly you will say, it is better than the beginning. This also is a good point for us to, lastly, encourage our faith. We've looked at our past, our future, but this verse can help us as we face the pains of the present as well. The spirit of our world, of our culture, of our time says, get it now, enjoy it now, make sure that you don't get shortchanged in any way. Your life is short, and you better get your pleasure now. Focus upon it because it's going to slip away soon. It cries out for instant satisfaction. And maybe that's just the nature of the system, the nature of things, how they work, or maybe that's just how society is now. But certainly we can see that press in upon us. I want that now. I want this accomplished now. Certainly we do. But God says you should wait for his time. You should wait for his time and allow him to work. And he's bringing something about within your life that will be better than it would have otherwise. We are familiar with Isaiah. They wait upon the Lord. You shall renew your strength if we wait upon the Lord. Mount up with wings of eagles. Run and not be weary. Walk and not faint. It's in waiting that we learn to rely upon God and to trust him. You have difficulty waiting. You have difficulty with patience and trying to allow God to work what he's trying to work within you. You're not alone. You know, certainly many struggle with the idea of waiting upon God. It's a difficult task because we want this resolved now. If we have a problem or an issue, certainly we want it fixed as quickly as possible. If, regardless of what we're thinking about, we want that fixed. If the oven doesn't work anymore and, we can't cook our Sunday dinner, then we want that resolved, don't we? That's true of anything that we can think of. We must learn to rely on God and trust him, even when it doesn't exactly make sense to us. And those times are many, I'm certain. We do not have the full picture. God does. We know the end, and we know whatever happens, if we remain faithful to God, the end will be better than the beginning. If we stick close to God and do what he has called us to do, the end will be better. Revelation 2:10, be faithful unto death, and I'll give you a crown of life. If we are struggling to hang on, if we're going through a difficult time, we should take heart. The Bible speaks to this matter. It knows that in their day that occurred. It knows that it's going to happen in our day, and for anyone in the future, it's going to happen in theirs as well. Difficult times come, but the end is better. It's worth waiting for. Paul says, I consider the sufferings of the present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Romans chapter 8, verse 18. So we think just an overview of the life of Jesus during his ministry, during his life in general, probably, but we're told specifically about a brief period of his life. Well, what occurred during that life? Well, we know that much of the time he was rejected, he was scorned, he was mocked, he was abused, and finally he was killed. He was killed. Yet now he is glorified in heaven. And the same thing waits for us. Paul, reasons, if we died with Christ, we believe we shall also live with him, knowing that Christ, been raised from the dead, dies no more. And certainly within that picture we see the end is definitely better than the beginning, isn't it? I mean, the beginning was grand, but the end is so much better, so much more wonderful. Death no longer has dominion. Endure difficult times. Hang on to your faith. We shall be glorified in the end. That's not to treat things superficially, to say it's all easy and I'm just going to treat your problems lightly that you're going through, because don't worry about it. The end will be better. Just state, times are difficult. And we do struggle with various things. And sometimes people just don't understand that are around us. But God does. Hang on to our faith. We shall be glorified. We think of a lump of coal deep in the earth. What changes that coal? Time? Well, time plays a factor, but it's not really time that changes it. The thing that really changes that coal is pressure. Pressure, strain, stress, things pressing in upon it. Great and tremendous pressure changes the coal into a diamond. And then it undergoes great and pressure. Eventually, someday, somebody finds it and it'll be mined. And they'll dig it out of the earth. And they'll send it to a jeweler. And then he'll cut a lot of it away. That seems like a painful event as we consider it within our own lives. As we are under stress, under pressure, squeezed about. But God is refining us. And there will be a time when we have to have some parts cut away. This is difficult. This is not pleasant to go through. Not easy. If you are under stress, if you are being pruned right now, be assured the end is better than the beginning. It is worth it. Finally, we would consider that we should take action as we think about these aspects within this verse. If the end is to be better than the beginning, then there must be a beginning, right? You have to have a beginning. We must walk with God. We must begin to walk with God. If we have begun to walk with God, we cannot stop walking with God. And if we do, we must be certain to pick it back up again. Whatever that might be, you cannot end what you do not begin. And as we look at the beginning of a new year, 2016, which not so long ago seemed like a far, far distant place. It's not so distant. We should be certain that we take inventory of our lives, in particular our spiritual lives. Make the proper beginning if needed in our life. As we referenced, truth is not always accurate statement. Not everything that we know of ends better than it begins. There are, of course, things that we can think of that do not end better than they begin. One example, maybe you have others. Certainly if we sat around and hashed them out, we could come up with numerous examples, but one example would be someone that goes to a wild party, gets horribly drunk, and they wake up the next morning, can't remember the name, can't remember what they did, and they feel absolutely atrocious. The end is not better than the beginning there. It is actually horribly worse and potentially catastrophically worse. Think of the businessman that makes lots of money. That in itself is not bad. But after a while, this businessman begins to serve his money. That is bad. And then at the end, he goes on about his life, always fearful of losing his money, so that his money consumes him and he is consumed by it and controlled by it. He is wealthy at the end of his life, but scared to death that he will die like a pauper and is serving only his money and not God. The end is not better than the beginning there. In both of those examples, we see a common theme. They're lacking a life lived out in faith. For this to be an accurate statement, it needs to be at the center. As we think about our own lives, will my end be better than my beginning? Will my end be better than my beginning? Am I walking the proper path that I need to walk? Have I begun with God? What will I tell God when I stand before Him? Will I say I'm a good person? Well, if we do that, if that is our answer to the Lord, then He will probably get out a book and note spots where we weren't really all that good of a person. Or will we tell Him, the blood of Christ covers my sins? What shall we say? If you can say that, certainly the end will be better than the beginning. Before 2015 leaves us completely, it is important that each thinks of, what is my end going to look like? Where am I at right now? Have I continued down the path that I started at the beginning, or have I wavered from that? Have I neglected to get up during a difficult, dark time? Have I been of the mindset that the sun is not coming out anymore? That it's over, it's incomplete? Or am I continuing to walk as I ought to? Will my end be better than my beginning? Let us stand and we close with a word of prayer this morning. Dear Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this time together, and for each person that is here, and for opportunities that we have to be able to worship you, to glorify the great things that you have done for us within our lives. We pray that you would take these words that we have heard here this morning, that you would help them to resonate within our lives and our minds. Help us to learn from your word, that your Spirit would continue to guide us. Help us to be faithful to endeavor to continue down the path that you have given to us, so that we may have a proper and beneficial end. We ask that you would give us safety and protection and blessing as we go from here, that you would watch over us throughout this day, that you would be honored and glorified through our actions, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You're dismissed.